Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to get a little bit deeper into the scriptures about women's roles and particularly Genesis 1 through 3. All right, thank you so much for tuning in. This is a follow-up to the Nova Church House Church Leaders Workshop that we had just recently about the women's roles. And there was a request to get deeper into the scriptures because the workshop itself was a lot of overview. It was a lot of high-level discussion and a couple lessons that drilled down a little bit more. But the desire, as is the desire of every Christian, which is to get deeper into the specific text, we didn't really have time for that. And what you'll see as you engage in your own personal study is that we could have spent 4 hours about one of these passages because the Word of God is just so deep and so wide, and we're never really going to get it all. But what we did want to do was put a little primer out there, maybe to kickstart your own study, to give you not an overview of the whole subject, but a couple things for you to really look in and wrestle with. We're going to take a look. We're going to start with Genesis 1 through 3. And it's a great place to start because it does seem to point to what God's original intent was for his creation, humanity, and men and women. So let's go ahead and dive in. If you go over to Genesis chapter 1, we know that in the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. And in verses 1 through 26, he progressively creates everything that we've got right here, and it's beautiful, and he calls it good, and he calls it good. And finally, in verse 26, he creates man. Verse 26 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish in the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, over all the earth, and every other creeping thing that creeps on the earth.'" First thing we have to recognize is that humanity is an exceptional creation. Humans are specifically intended for a unique relationship with God. I'm quoting directly from the ICOC teacher's book, The Bible and Gender. Is the specified role of stewardship over all things previously created requires that they are created in a different manner. Humans are special. Humans get to be made in the image of God. Nothing else gets to be made in the image of God. Everything else is made by the hands of God. Only humanity is made in the image of God. Now, as we get into the original language, it is difficult and it is dangerous to focus in on only one word or only one thing, but words are important. And since God created the world with words, we can get into some specific words. One thing is, in verse 26, it says, "Then let us make man in our image." And that word there, for man, the idea of for the English language, traditionally, the way that people have referred to in English as mankind has been man. Even the idea of mankind referred to humanity that way. When we get down to verse 27, it says, "So God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him." And the word there for man is Adam, which, by the way, really just means reddish brown dirt, clay kind of deal. So Adam is referring to humanity. But then it says, "In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." Now it switches here from Adam, the humanity, the overall, it switches into very technical terms, male and female. Now it says male is the original word zakar, and the female, nekeba, he created them. So when it says he created man, yes, he did, Adam, but humanity, that humanity was not complete without male and female. We're going to see this expanded upon in Genesis 2. However, in Genesis 1, the way that the author understands this is that there is not one without the other. So it says he created them. And God blessed them in verse 28. It says, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth." This right here, we got into this at the workshop, but right here, the verbs of be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion, those are very, very technical in the grammar. They are second person plural imperatives, meaning second person, you, plural, y'all, and then imperative, command. So this is a command from God to the two of them, male and female. There is no command specifically to man or male, zakar, to fill and subdue the earth, have dominion, or to the woman to fulfill and just create life, and man to rule over it. No, it is both of them together, that God is acknowledging that this could not happen without both of them together, which is this beautiful picture of part of God's original plan was definitely a partnership. Now, as we get into Genesis 2, that we start to see things that are like, okay, how does that partnership actually work? That'll bring up a next question. But at the very beginning, there is no differentiation between what God commands male and female. It's difficult to say exactly what we can conclude from this, but what we can conclude is both man and woman, male and female, are made in the image of God. Not just male, but male and female, and that the command was in fact to both of them equally at this point in time. Now let's go over to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2, if you get into literary and scholarship, there are some scholars that believe that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 were written by two separate people that God has woven together into kind of like a quilt to help us understand, but that were compiled way back thousands of years to exactly the way that he wanted. But that's why it could be, that is one possible explanation. It also could be that God just wants us to have two separate understandings of the first and second chapters of Genesis. As we get into it, God once again creates the world in chapter 2. We get a little bit more detail into what happened with male and female. So man is chilling. Man has given livestock. And that word there, once again, is Adam. So it is the first human. What does that human look like? Well, these are questions that are really important questions, but not necessarily as have the exact answer to. Was this an anatomical male? If you refer down to verse 25, where it says the man and his wife, that is also Adam. So it seems that in this sense, it might be referring to an individual. But still, if the Bible's not going to contradict itself, then somehow back in chapter 1, the Adam referring to humanity still holds true. So you have to ask the question, is this an anatomically male Adam, or exactly what is it? Again, not 100% sure. What we do know is that as Adam is tending the world and giving names to all the animals, in verse 21, verse 20 says there was not found a helper fit for him. So that spurs God to create female, or a helper. Now, this is very much something that many people have heard. The word here is ezer kenegdo. It means helper. Now, what this exactly means, this is another example of when we get too much into a word, we can get ourselves into trouble. And the way that we can see things, you can talk yourself out of both sides. On one hand, there is helper. I mean, it's someone who gives help. Adam needed a helper, so God provided woman. God creates woman. And it doesn't say that woman needed a helper, Adam. It says Adam needed a helper, woman. But there is this other really, really big issue with that, is that the word ezer for helper is also used to refer to God. That it says that God is humanity's ezer, the exact same word. It says that in Deuteronomy 33. It says it in Psalm 54, verse 70, Psalm 146. The idea that God being Israel's helper or humanity's helper, ezer, and then to somehow connect that to that God is somehow submissive to humanity or Israel, that doesn't quite hold water. It may be more accurate to say that, well, Azar is more of somebody that is corresponding to someone else, that I'm helping you, I'm corresponding to you. Now, you might be able to say that you complement each other, that each one of you has a different role. But again, when we get into this word, it's a bit more complicated than just, well, man needed a helper, and so woman became that helper. It could be you're an ally. It could be that you're just a companion, or in the case of God, a powerful ally, as John Mark Hicks writes in his book, Women Serving God. And at this point, the ICOC teachers in the Bible and Gender say that perhaps it is best to understand the idea of a suitable helper. The Azar Kenegdo is someone who is parallel or abreast to the original person who needs help. And the reason we bring this up is because, well, what's about to happen in Genesis chapter 3, we're trying to understand what it was like before there was a fall of humanity. What was God's original intent and original purpose for his creation? What did he originally mean it to be? Because that has implications for how we practice things today. So moving on to Genesis chapter 3, regardless of what God's original intent was, where did it all go wrong? Sin came in. The serpent deceives Eve. Eve eats the apple. Then Adam eats it later. Their eyes were opened, or they realized that they were naked before they had no shame. And what happens after that, we know that the fall occurs. But what we're going to dig into here is verse 14 and following, where God explains the effects of the fall. Not just that there was sin that entered the world, but very specific consequences of it. Verse 14 and 15, God specifically curses the snake. You can go back and take a look at that and read it. Then verse 16, he very specifically says to the woman, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, and he shall rule over you. That's the translation from the ESV. So your desire will be for your husband is different translations of all that. What is interesting is that, notice, God never curses Eve. He states the consequences of her own sin, saying that, well, yeah, your pain will multiply in childbearing. And then really the issue here is your desire shall be contrary to your husband, and he shall rule over you. So you take a look at that and it seems, well, that's pretty clear. That makes sense. And we've seen that pattern played out over and over again in the history of the world. Regardless of your stance of whether you believe in male headship or more in a complementary sense or more of an egalitarian approach of equality, regardless, what we do see is that what happened after the fall is a pattern of male domination and ruling over. God doesn't curse her that way, but he does explain that this is what's going to happen. And this is what we've seen played out. Totally makes sense. Now, it says here to Adam in verse 17, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat it. Cursed is the ground because of you, and in pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. So all of this, from dust you were taken, from dust you will return. All of that together. What we see here is Adam being cursed, but it's a different curse and different consequences to that of his wife. So that does suggest that things will be different, that there might be different roles into the future. The woman, he says the consequences will be your childbearing will be more painful, and the effect of your husband will rule over you. Your desire will be for him, that forever, whatever co-partnership, whatever co-dominion was before, it will no longer be there. And the man does not get that same curse. So what it does suggest is after the fall, there are different things. Now, what does that mean? All of these implications, what does that mean for us as disciples here in the 21st century? And for me, you take a look at this thing, you look at original, untainted creation, and then you look at the fall and the corruption of it. We see this played out. That's no surprise to us that there are the two genders that might have been great at one point in time, but after the fall certainly was not just complicated, but destroyed and replaced with trouble and struggle to get the upper hand from after the fall. The big question is that, and this comes from a narrative perspective, is that what is the effect of the good news, the gospel, on the relationship between men and women? Does the consequences of sin from the fall continue to today, or has the blood of Jesus allowed it to go back to the way that things were in Genesis 1, when things were not tainted, when things were not corrupted by sin, that there was this beautiful partnership, co-partnership that was meant to fill the earth and subdue the earth in this beautiful, God-glorifying way because they were the image of God. And that's a big question to ask, because there are massive implications on how you answer that question and practice for today. I'm not sure there's 100% confidence in either interpretation or the different nuances of that interpretation, whatever that might be. But that is a question that we have to ask ourselves and have to answer. What we can say conclusively is that in Genesis 1, God creates both male and female in his image and tells them both to partner in fulfilling their mission on this earth. We can say from Genesis 2 that regardless of interpretation, man could not be alone, that a helper was necessary. And in Genesis 3, what we see without a doubt is that sin, the fall, corrupted whatever relationship was to be before. The God-glorifying one was corrupted, and now a struggle was going to ensue. These straight from the Bible and Gender book put out by the ICOC teachers. And those are conclusions that we make. I think they're fair without a doubt. Now, once we branch out from that, we have to start making inferences and conclusions based on, and this is where we go back to the blueprint versus the narrative. What markers do you think you use and that we need to use in order to make a decision about practice into the future? In no way is this exhaustive. There is so much to read and study about this. I barely hit the cliff notes of the cliff notes for this, but wrestle with this. Think about that and see what God reveals to you through study and prayer. And we'll go ahead and catch you on the next one. Thanks.